Welcome to another episode of Tall Hungry Girl Talks. Today we are talking about the possibilities of limitless transformations. I am interviewing Morgan Steiner. She is an author, consultant, and thought leader on women's leadership, work-life balance, inspirational parenting, overcoming adversity, and surviving violence against women. She recently completed her fourth nonfiction work, The Naked Truth, a memoir which she explores female aging and sexuality after motherhood and divorce. Her 2009 memoir about surviving domestic violence, Crazy Love, was a New York Times bestseller and subject of the first TED Talk by a domestic violence survivor, which now has nearly 6 million views on YouTube. I checked today. Her corporate experience includes the Washington Post, Johnson & Johnson, Leo Burnett, and 17 Magazine. Follow her on Facebook or LinkedIn via Morgan Steiner or via @LeslieBooks on Instagram and Twitter. Welcome, Leslie. Thank you so much.
It is such a pleasure to be here to talk about transformation.
Yes. And I feel a little bit nervous. I didn't want to tell you this, when we were talking before. I feel a little nervous because you are a fellow writer and journalist. And so I feel, you are much superior to me, but I feel like I'm interviewing a peer. And so.
Well, it's hard to talk about a lot of these things anyway. So I totally understand. But
yes.
It is never my desire to make anybody nervous or intimidate them. So I think you're going to get over that really fast.
Well, that means that you're a good guest if I'm feeling nervous. So
okay. Well, then thank you. Thank you for the compliment. Yes. I'll take
it. Okay. So we will dive right in to talk about your book, Crazy Love, because it really is the starting point of so much of your pain, but also is the genesis of so much of your growth. Can you tell me more about the book and what it's about?
Well, I think you put that really well. And I would never have understood at the time what a transformational experience it was going to be for me, because it was excruciatingly painful. So what happened, a very long story, relatively short, is that I didn't date much in college for a variety of reasons. So when I graduated from college and I had my job at 17 Magazine and I was living in New York, I was really like on top of the world. Like, I am going to date anybody in New York I want, and men are so interesting, and I'm going to make up for lost time. And I was lucky enough to have a roommate with the exact same philosophy, and we had so much fun. And then one night when I wasn't looking for anybody, I met this great guy on the New York City subway, and he was handsome, and he had just graduated from an Ivy League school, just like me. I had just graduated from Harvard. He worked at a big Wall Street investment bank. He seemed so great. And he pursued me, and we started dating. And before I knew what had happened, I had fallen in love with him, like falling off a cliff. He reminded me a lot of my father, and he adored me, and he was so funny and sweet and the smartest man I'd ever met. And before I even knew what had happened next, I had agreed to marry him, and then I married him. So within like a year and a half, I went from being like this woman who was going to date all of New York City to a woman who had married her soulmate. And the story, the fairy tale, quick as abusive relationships always do, very quickly devolved into a nightmare. He isolated me from my friends and family very cleverly, and I had no idea it was happening. And he got me to quit my job at 17 and move to a tiny town in New England where I knew no one and I was financially dependent on him. And then the first time he attacked me was 5 days before our wedding. And, they never hit you on the first date. There wouldn't be a second date if they did. He waited until I was completely in love and committed and vulnerable. And I married him anyway because I thought it was just a one-time thing. I thought he was nervous. Because of the wedding. People always say that men get cold feet. And then he beat me twice more on our honeymoon, and my life became a complete horror show. When things were good between us, which they still were, it was still great. I was still with that man, that charming, wonderful, smart, funny man who I had fallen in love with. But then completely unpredictably, he would lose his mind over things that I had no control over and that I couldn't anticipate. If I made dinner that he didn't like, and I just want to stipulate, I'm a terrible cook. And so I made dinner all the time that he didn't like. He would just, it was like I was physically abusing him. Like he would throw it all over the place. He would act like a little kid.
Yeah.
And I learned along the way that he had been abused as a child, really horrifically abused. And so that's what my life became. And I was only 23 years old. I was really in over my head, and I was terrified, as most victims are.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Leslie, I'm just going to stop for a second because I think the microphone is picking up the wind or the movement.
Okay.
Yeah. I can't, sorry.
Thank you for stopping, because I don't want it. I have a fan going because it's so hot in my office. So I'm going to just move to a slightly cooler place.
Okay. I don't know if it's rubbing on your neck and
I undid the microphone. I'm glad you told me. Okay. Does this sound better?
Yes.
Okay.
Much better. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay. Cause I was like trying to pay attention, but then I'm like, oh no.
No, that's awful. It's awful. That's awful. I hate the background noise. Okay. Good.
Okay. So we'll dive back in. So I think that happens to women so often, is that we make excuses for men. And I think that I understand that, you broke the chain of violence because you got out of the relationship. But if he was abused as a child, he wasn't able to get out of that relationship, and thus it continues. Data suggests that domestic abuse right now is acting like an opportunistic infection flourishing in the conditions created by the coronavirus. So it is a major issue that's happening right now. During your TED Talk, you said that abuse thrives only in silence. How did you break your silence? And and do you have suggestions for other women on how to break their silence during the pandemic and in general?
Well, you're absolutely right that under quarantine, there has been a huge spike in abuse, because quarantine is isolating in and of itself. You're trapped with your abuser, and there's so much anxiety and financial insecurity and other problems. So it's a terrible thing. The only silver lining to being quarantined with an abuser is that I think it can break through your denial. And so that is really the first thing that has to happen. Before you tell anybody that you are being abused and break the silence, you have to be honest with yourself about what's going on. So the first person you have to break the silence with is yourself. And then it's really important, incredibly important, to tell other people, at least one other person, but preferably more, what's happening to you. And it has to be somebody who is going to believe you and who you trust, and somebody who is not going to try to take over your life and make you leave, because you might not be ready to leave. You might not want to leave. And that's what stopped me from telling people for a long time. I wanted the abuse to stop. I wanted to go back to the fairy tale beginning of our relationship, but I didn't want to end the relationship. And I knew that if I told people that I was being abused and having loaded guns held to my head on a regular basis, they would call the police, they would put him in jail, and they'd make me leave. So that kept me quiet for a long time. And my own denial was really powerful too. If you had asked me the morning after my ex first held a loaded gun to my head, if I was a battered wife, an abused wife, I would have looked you straight in the face and said, no, I'm not. I'm a smart, independent, confident woman who's in love with a really troubled man. And I'm the only person on earth who understands him and can help him, and back the hell away, because I got this.
Yeah.
That was what my denial was. So I was very fortunate that I had two dear friends who somehow could sense what was happening. And they managed to break the silence for me. And on separate occasions, I was able to talk to both of them about what was happening. And they didn't make me leave. They were very, very sympathetic towards my ex-husband. They knew he had been abused as a kid and that he was fundamentally a really good but incredibly troubled and dangerous person. And so by breaking the silence, what I did was I brought somebody into the inner circle. I brought two people in. So from then on, whenever I was being abused, I felt like I wasn't so alone, that they knew about it and that they were there if I needed them. And that's why it's so powerful to break the silence. It's the easiest and hardest thing that you can do if you're a victim. And it doesn't mean that the abuse is going to end or that you're going to be saved. It just means that you're going to be able to see a path to rescuing yourself and getting out. And that's what it was in my case.
Yeah. I think too, it's like an accountability partner too, almost. Like I unfortunately in college dated a guy that was abusive and he hit me once and that was it. But I got a black eye from it. And, you know, he was not a good guy. And I didn't realize until 10 years later that I was in an abusive relationship. Like that, I think that that's how much we kind of train our brains to be in denial about that. But I did tell one person, and that was someone that reminded me, like, Tahira, like, come on, we're calling the police. I didn't call the police, but it's that accountability partner. And I think that that's so important, like you said, to tell someone.
I also, one of my favorite sayings is that reality is your friend. No matter what the reality is.
Yes. That's
it's
a good
important
saying.
to face it.
Yes.
And we get so many messages from our society about what a good partner is, a woman, what a good wife is, and a good mother, and a good friend. And a lot of that has to do with feeling sorry for men and helping them with their emotions and their anger and their careers and their parenting and everything else. We're so encouraged to be helpers and nurturers. So I really fell for that. And also one of the other very big problems, and I'm so glad that you're delving into this subject on your podcast because it's such a huge problem, is the misconceptions about what abuse really looks and feels like. We have this idea in our society that abuse happens to poor women, preferably immigrants or people of a race that's not ours, who have too many children and who have no self-esteem. And that the men who hurt them are monsters. And that is not the reality. Every ethnic group, every education level, every religion, every neighborhood has abuse victims in it, abusers and abuse victims. It's everywhere. 1 in 3 women will be abused in her lifetime. And so it's really, really common. And so when it was started to happen to me, I didn't know, I knew exactly none of that. And I didn't realize that that's what really abuse was. I didn't realize that abuse was being in love with somebody who you were trying to help, who was throwing food at you, you know, a couple times a week. And, once he poured coffee grinds on my head while I was getting ready for a job interview, it's like there was no textbook that said that's what abuse is.
Yeah.
So I love to talk about this to say that's what abuse is. Abuse is about power and control and gaslighting, trying to convince you that you're the problem when you know you're not. And that's why it's so important to tell your friends and family or a coworker or anybody about this, because they can hold up reality to you and say, no, Tahira, no, this is not normal. You didn't deserve a black eye.
Yes.
He's going to do it again. It's going to be worse. You have to leave now. That's why you need to break the silence.
Yeah. And too, breaking the silence, it breaks the dam of shame, right? So you can relieve that pressure.
It's so true. And there were so many things that were really powerful about the 2 friends who I confided in. One is seeing on their faces how scared they were for me. They were terrified that he was going to kill me. And it broke my denial. But then also that they loved me so much that they agreed to not tell anybody and to just be there and kind of hold my hand during this very dark time. It made me feel so loved. And in my primary relationship, I wasn't feeling loved. I was feeling like I was the problem and my self-esteem had crumbled. So it was really important to have that love. So if you have an abuse victim in your life, somebody who you think is being abused, try to very gently confront them and just say, I know something is changed and you're not yourself and I'm wondering what it is. And I need you to know I love you and I think you're great and I'm always here for you. That's the main message that a victim needs to hear, and it saved my life.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I'm glad that you had 2 good friends to support you through that process.
And then once I really broke the silence, once I left him, eventually we went to business school together, a very prestigious business school. And one of the nights towards the end of our second year when we were about to graduate, he beat me so badly that it was really clear, like he was seconds away from killing me. And so that's when I really broke the silence, and I called the police for the first time, and I asked for help. And that night when I got home from filing all of the restraining order paperwork, I called every member of my family and all of my friends and said, look, I have not been telling you the truth, and I need your help. And then I had an army of people to help me.
Yeah.
And I needed it. I needed every one of those.
Yeah.
Because it really takes a village to end a relationship and to rebuild your life. And I needed them mostly to stop me from going back to him.
Yes. Accountability.
Really
yes.
Right.
Yes. Because I think that people think that like, oh, if someone hits you, you're just going to automatically stop loving them. And that's not the case. And I mean, I wish that that's how the brain worked, because then people wouldn't stay. But it's like these two realities exist between this person that's treating you horrible, but then some days they don't. Some days it's amazing, and you're loving towards each other. And so there is, I mean, sometimes those dualities do exist, and that is the pull that keeps people, I think, in relationships too.
And it's not just sometimes, I think it's all the time. One of the very confusing things about abuse is that it's love and abuse wrapped together. And it's very confusing.
Yeah.
And that's why it takes people so long to leave. It takes the average victim 7 attempts to leave before he or she can actually leave. And it does happen to men too. And they're just as trapped. And then, we could spend another 6 hours talking about emotional abuse.
Yes.
And how difficult that is, because it's a lot harder to spot, but it's just as soul killing. And I was lucky in some ways that my ex-husband was so violent and so out of control that I was able to leave before he really destroyed my life, before I had kids with him. And I didn't know that it was a transformation at the time. I just knew that I was, 27 years old, and I was leaving my soulmate, and I was terribly in debt because of business school and because I had taken out so much debt in his name, and I thought my life was over. But it really actually was the beginning of my journey to being a much more confident woman with much more positive relationships. And also professionally, as a writer, it gave me the best material that I ever have had in my life. And it took me about 5 years to even talk about the abusive relationship and to start writing. It took me another 10 years to actually write Crazy Love. But then I did it, and then it was a New York Times bestseller, and I started getting asked right away to speak publicly about it. And then I did the TED Talk, and it turned into this incredible story of empowerment, female empowerment and victimhood empowerment that has changed my life in ways that I never could have possibly fathomed ever when I met that man on the subway and started to fall in love with him.
Yeah.
And he always said to me, one of the great things he said to me at the beginning is he said that he knew I was going to be a great writer one day. And you know what? He was right. And he gave me the best material that a memoirist could ever have, even though I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Yeah. So after getting out of that relationship, you wrote your book, and then you got remarried, right?
Yes, I did.
Yes.
I did. I remarried, and I had 3 kids with a man who I also loved very much, who, when I left my first marriage, I vowed I would never be in an abusive relationship again. That if anybody hit me, no matter how much I loved them, I would leave. And I have kept that vow. But I wish I could have added something more to that vow to myself, which was that I would never take any sort of neglect either, because my second husband was very self-centered and very neglectful and emotionally abusive in his own way. And I ended up having to leave, well, not having to. I could have stayed in that relationship forever. But I wanted to leave it after 20 years because I wanted more. And I didn't want to have to hide my truth and accommodate. There were a lot of very small sacrifices that made me feel like I wasn't me. I was like somebody who was auditioning to be a politician's wife.
Yeah.
And I just didn't want to do that. So I ended that relationship too. And we divorced after 20 years of marriage when I turned 49. And because I'm a writer, I decided to write about it. And I didn't want to write about divorce because divorce is ugly and boring.
Yeah.
And
half the married people go through it. So, yeah.
And so many wonderful people have written great books about divorce. So I couldn't write about that.
Yeah.
But I decided to write about how I found myself again after getting divorced. And one of the many, many unfortunate things about my marriage was that my ex-husband tried to convince me that I was sexually really unappealing and unattractive. It was one of the many ways that he tried to destroy my self-esteem. And so I realized after I got divorced that I didn't know if I ever wanted another husband again, but I really still loved men, and that
Yeah.
I wanted a lot of them in my life. And so I went on
Yes.
this crazy odyssey. It was crazy to me at the time. It turns out now it wasn't crazy, and lots of women do this. We just don't tend to talk about it very much or write about it because it goes against the mythology of the good girl and the good woman.
Mhm.
But I was open to having more men in my life, and I totally coincidentally, accidentally met this fantastic man in an airport. He was the most handsome man I'd ever flirted with. I'd forgotten how to flirt, but he taught me again really quickly. And also he was 20 years younger. And I didn't know that younger men liked older women. And I had spent my entire feminist career making fun of men who got divorced at 49 and dated younger women. And now I understand why they do, because it was the best way to build up my self-esteem.
Yeah.
And so we ended up getting to know each other, and eventually doing something I'd never imagined doing, which was we met in a hotel for the express purpose of breaking my celibacy streak, which was several years long at that point.
Oh my goodness.
I mean,
That's rough.
this man was like a god. It was just, and he was like sent from heaven to restore my sexual confidence. And
Yeah.
I remember when he took my clothes off, I was so horrified because I'd had 3 kids and nothing looked like it had once. And he was so much younger and he was perfect. And I remember him stopping and looking me at the face and saying, stop it. I know what you're thinking. Your body isn't perfect, but it's so beautiful and sexy. And as he ran his hands up and down all my curves, and I was like, oh my God, like who gets this? It was so amazing. So that's the kind of thing that I wrote about. And I ended up having 5 lovers over the course of a year, and they were all different, and they all taught me something wonderful and amazing about myself. Some of them ended really badly.
So did you plan this?
No, I didn't plan any of it.
So what triggered the journey? Was it just like Stella getting her groove back? Was it like that movie? Like, okay, I need to get like some love in my life, like love.
I didn't know any of it. I really didn't know any of it. All I knew was that I had thought I was never going to have sex again because the marriage had really turned me off it. And then when I started flirting with Dylan and eventually had sex with him, like 500 times in the hotel that night, I was like,
Yes.
You know what? I want this. I do want this. And
yeah,
I didn't want it just with him because I didn't want to get too attached to him. And I didn't want to be vulnerable that way. And I didn't want to marry anybody. And so I came up with the idea that if I had like 5 Dylans in my life at once, it would be great. And I confessed this crazy idea to the one person who I trusted who wouldn't be horrified by my sluttiness. And she said, the 5 boyfriend plan. Great. Go get it. That's exactly what you need. And so I went and I did it. And it was just the most exhilarating thing I have ever done in my life, to just say, to hell with all the rules that I followed. Where did those rules get me about dating one man at a time and like being a good girl and a good wife? They got me into 2 horrible marriages. I'm going to treat men like a buffet, and I'm going to take that one and that one and that one and that one. And that's what I did. And it's still somewhat what I do. My journey has evolved because I now would like to be in a really healthy, long-term sort of quasi-committed relationship. But I'm really grateful to all of those men who helped me. And I'm grateful to myself that I said, you know what, you're worth it. You're worth taking a risk and going out there and defying so many social norms. And as I said earlier, what I have found since writing The Naked Truth is that so many women of all different ages do this, and that I love it. It's a glorious thing to do.
Yes. So like, what was the main thing that you learned? Was it just like a sense of freedom, or that like screw the conventions of like womanhood, like what was the biggest takeaway that you walked away with?
There are so many, but I would say the biggest one that meant the most to me at the time was that I was a really attractive, desirable woman in many men's viewpoint, and that I had a right to enjoy my sexuality, and I had a right to be appreciated by men. That there was nothing contradictory in being a feminist who loved men and wanted them to sort of heal me.
Yeah.
so that was the biggest thing that I learned, that it was that everything about our social structure is designed to favor men and disempower women. Even the fact that you're supposed to kind of sit there demurely and wait for men to come on to you and ask you for your number, that allows men to choose first. And so they have an advantage from the very beginning. And I found when I started choosing first and, looking at a crowd of men in the airport or at a party or at the gym or whatever and saying, that's the one I want. I'm going to go talk to that one and I'm going to ask that guy out.
Yeah.
It just transformed everything about me and everything about my life.
Yeah. I'm still working up like I don't even know if I want to say confidence, the courage to do that, because I see guys and I'm like, oh, I'm scared and I don't want to be too aggressive. And it's like all of these programmed things go in my head about, oh no, I shouldn't do that. Like they'll perceive me as this way, or this is what we're supposed to do. Men should come to you.
So society is giving you that message, but it's not men who are giving you that message, because I tell you, I was and I am exactly the same way. Men love it when you do it. They absolutely love it. They have been working this gig hard since they were 13 years old, and it's really hard.
Yeah.
And they love it when a confident woman makes it clear that she's interested. They are utterly delighted. There's no downside to it. I have not had a single man say to me, oh, but you're sort of slutty, or you're this, or you're that. I wouldn't want to marry you, or nothing like that. They all love it, and they get it, that the game is unfair, and it's just as unfair to them. I mean, the whole mythology of Prince Charming is completely destructive to women, but also it's unfair to men, because they don't want to be Prince Charming. They just want to be seen for who they are and appreciated for who they are.
Yeah.
So I would encourage you. Yeah. And it breaks my heart, especially when a younger woman comes to me and says, oh, there are no men out there, or, like I had one recently who she had met a really great guy on the train, and she had wanted so badly to ask for his number or give him her card, and she couldn't. And I remember saying to her, you know what? You are never going to see that man again. It's gone. You had an opportunity and it's gone. Yeah. And that's heartbreaking. And that's what should be your motivation. So the next time you see a great guy, trust your instincts, and also remind yourself that if you don't go up to him right now, you're never going to see him again. And it's so easy. No. All you say is like, oh, it's really hot today. Or, are you, where are you from? Or like, it's what makes airports so easy, that you just say, do you live here, or do you live there? You want to make it really easy to chitty chat. Yeah. And then it's really easy to say, hey, my name is Leslie. Here's my card. You're ever in here again, and I'd love to take you to coffee, or I'd love to show you around. Like it's actually so easy when you get over that societal hurdle, and it's exhilarating and wonderful.
Yeah, I know. It's funny because I literally can talk to any person in the world, like anybody, except for a guy that I think is attractive.
Yeah. So that is I want to tell you, that is a patriarchal plot against you. I'm not kidding, because our society wants men to have the power to go first. And it's wrong. It's destructive for everybody. So I would get angry at that voice in your head that says that.
Okay.
And really try to go do it. And I've done it so many times, and I've had some hilarious failures. Failure is part of it. But that's another thing I learned from The Naked Truth, is that rejection is meaningless. It means nothing. It has nothing to do with you. It's just that you're not his cup of tea, or he's gay, or he doesn't, in my case, he doesn't like older women, or he doesn't like blondes. It has nothing to do with you, and you just move right on.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good mindset.
That's why you have to have at least 5, so that you don't get rejected by any of them. It's like, oh, okay, well, you know what? I'll go call the other one.
Like, I'm not worried about you.
You shouldn't be at the beginning. Men have this figured out. Men play the field
they do.
At the beginning.
They actually, you know what? And I would say that I think that oftentimes men end up taking a healthier approach to relationships, because they're not taking it as seriously. They're actually enjoying it.
Right.
And I think fun. That,
I know.
Yeah.
We have I sort of hate to say this as a feminist, but we have a lot to learn from men.
Yeah, no, we do. Yes, no, I absolutely agree. A lot of my girlfriends in DC, they're like, Tahira, you need to date more than one person at once. And I'm just like, and they're like, no, you need to.
It is the answer to so many problems. Also, One of the things that I learned is that if you are just dating one man, especially if you are just sleeping with one man and it's an uncommitted relationship, you get overly attached to that man. It's a biological thing. We women are primed to get really attached to a man too early. And if you're dating other guys, it makes it much easier to look at the one that you're with objectively and to see where, you remember what I said, reality is your friend?
Yes.
And we make up these really elaborate fantasies, especially when we like a guy. All the mythology about he's the one and I'm going to marry him, and you start planning the wedding, you've been known for 5 minutes. That is really so destructive. And so it helps when you're dating a couple of different guys, because then you start to realize that nobody's perfect. And it's just tremendously empowering and important.
Yeah. Yeah. So we previously discussed the taboo of being single in our pre-interview conversations. And I feel it every day when people ask me, why are you single? And then they'll list all of, all the perceived attributes that, they think I have. And it's really a mindset of like how, like my sister and I talk about it all the time. It's like, people don't ask guys that. People aren't like, oh, why are you single? But how can, and women and men, unravel this mindset and not internalize it? Because I feel like I'm often internalizing people asking me, why are you single? Like, what's wrong with you? You'll be 38 in July. Like, what's happening?
Oh God, what a fun question to be asked, because there are so many things that you could do with it. And first of all, let me just say, you are right. Men don't get asked that because it's a really personal and insulting question. And we wouldn't ask men that, but we feel comfortable saying that to women.
Yes.
So inherent in that question is a lot of bias and condescension. So no wonder you're internalizing it and it makes you feel uncomfortable. The kind of things that you could say, I think you should just have 5 stock responses. And one of them is simply, wow, that's a really personal question. Why are you asking me that? And put it back on them.
Yeah.
Another thing that I say a lot is, I'm really, really selective, and I just sort of laugh about it.
Yeah.
Or you could say, you know what? I have 5 boyfriends and I just haven't chosen.
I like that one.
And everybody will laugh. And the thing is, they won't think that you're serious. And then I'll be like, no, I'm really serious. You could also be like, hey, look, you know what? I'm actually looking. I'm looking for great guys. You got any? Set me up with them.
Yeah.
There's so many ways to handle it that are funny and empowering.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I love that. So your story is inspiring and one of transformation and growth. And I think that a lot of us during the coronavirus are being forced to deal with this ourselves in a way that we haven't ever before. I know that for me, it's like every single issue that I've had with anyone in my life, I can't go out and go to a bar and have a drink and forget about it. Or any issue that I've had with myself, it's like, oh no, I'm seeing that mirror often. I am seeing my face and I am having to soul search and deal with a lot of stuff. And, thankfully I am dealing with it. But what's your advice for navigating through that journey and transformation? Because you have gone through, 2 powerful transformations in your life.
I believe that 2020 is presenting us an incredible opportunity. It's just like all transformation. It's not easy and it's not pleasant. I had this idea that transformation and inner growth would feel exciting and wonderful, and it doesn't. A lot of it feels incredibly confusing and depressing and frustrating. But 2020 is going to turn out to be the year of perfect vision, because we are being forced to see so much in ourselves and our relationships and what we want to work on and what we want our careers to be and how we want things to be different or how we want things to be the same. Who really matters in our life? What is our relationship with ourselves? So I think to see 2020 so far as a great opportunity is the first thing. And I think it's actually really wonderful just see where the journey takes you, and don't try to take charge of it, and don't be really all type A about it, but just be open to transformation. Transformation is good and powerful. And I think that the key to any transformation, first and foremost, is your relationship with yourself. And as we've talked a couple of times about just being really honest with yourself. And that takes great courage. Alcohol does not help that. So it's actually really good that you're not going to bars right now, because you're being forced to really look at yourself day after day after day. And I also think that some of the tools that have helped me a lot is to think about my own self-talk and to change my self-talk instead of, why are you such a loser? You're single at this age. So-and-so, this relationship failed. That one failed. I didn't talk to that one, whatever it is. And say, no, I'm great. I'm so great. And I'm my own best friend. And it's so wonderful that I didn't marry that person or that I left that husband. It's actually so great that so-and-so is not talking to me because I don't want that person in my life either. To be much more positive about it. And there is an endless amount of online self-help and great books and great things that you can turn to, other women that you can turn to, and just be very open to transformation and also intentional about it. And, this is the last thing I'll say. This is one of my favorite things, and this is perfect for your podcast because I think this is what you do. Think of the people who have what you want, especially the women who have what you want, but maybe some men too. I always spend time thinking, who are what are the marriages that I would like to be in? So think about that. Who are the men or women who you really admire, not just admire, but would like to trade places with them, and then go interview them and be like, hey, what have you done that's worked? I do this all the time. I was sent on for work. I was on a cruise last year that happened to be all people who had been married for 30 or 40 years. And I spent the entire cruise interviewing happily married couples who had chosen essentially to quarantine together for 2 weeks on this cruise ship. And it was fascinating. There's so much to learn. So go after what you want and ask for help. And, back to the idea of breaking the silence, break the silence with yourself and say, hey, you know what? I'm not really happy about this part of my life. I'd like to change it. How are we going to do that?
Yeah. But wait, I have a question. What did the people on the cruise ship say? What were their secrets?
So they were so interesting because they all were the same. They all had the same vibe. They were all so incredibly comfortable with each other.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
And some of them had been married once, twice, 3 times before. And I think what they all said is, when I met him or her, I instantly felt really so comfortable and like I could talk to the person. So that comfort and communication is the core of everything.
Mm-hmm.
You can't get through. I mean, marriage is really hard. And especially if you throw in raising children or career struggles or quarantine, it's very, very difficult. So you've got to have somebody who you have great communication skills with. And that is very, very rare. So somebody who you're comfortable with and you have good communication skills with. But I will add that both of my husbands, I thought I had that at the beginning. I really did. So the other thing that is important is to take things really slowly, because the problems will surface. I think that it usually takes about 2 years for significant problems to surface in a relationship. So don't rush into anything. Even if you're dying to have kids, even if you know that this is right, try not to rush into it, because it's very rare that one of those marriages, none of the people on the cruise ship got married after 9 days or, whatever you hear. We hear too much about those stories. Yeah. They do happen, that sometimes you just know and it works out. But those people are just really lucky.
Yeah, no, they are.
Also, everybody who I talked to said they really wanted to be married. They wanted for it to work, that they were really hard times. And during the hard times, they both were really committed to being married. And so that's something to look for, to ask yourself, are you really committed to that? And also to make sure you find somebody who's really committed to it too. And all these things are very hard to suss out when you got hormones going and you think the person is your soulmate and the fantasy and all that.
And they're cute and have a 6-pack.
Exactly. Hey, I think cute and 6-pack really matters a lot, but other things matter more.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I just have 1 or 2 more questions. So to touch on the transformation part, because I think it's so important, because I feel like I am going through one in my life right now with just the kind of love self and the love, the with someone else, and then also like self-love. And one of the things that I'm learning is that, and I think that most people know this, but to reiterate it, it is not roses and sunshine and crystals and moonbeams and all of this. It is freaking painful, because you have to kind of dive back in and be like, wow, there are some major areas that I have to fix. Like I met with, I see a psychic, and I talked to her last night. And that was one of the things, she's kind of a spiritual advisor to me as well. And that was one of the things she was like, you aren't really ready for a relationship. And so she was like, you want it, but you don't want to be vulnerable. And so it really kind of cracked me open to look at things in a different way. And I think that that can be so painful. And so I think it's important for people when they're trying to transform to be open to that pain, because there is light on the other side. Were you scared for this transformation, or did you like?
God, yes. I mean, that's both time. I mean, the scariest things that I have ever done in my life on an emotional level, and also on a very practical level too, was to end both of my marriages.
Yeah.
It took a lot of courage. And it wasn't just painful. It was like diving into the muck.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what the future held. And that's a really hard part about transformation too, is that you're giving up something safe that maybe has worked for you in the past or somewhat worked. It's very scary. We human beings, we're very risk adverse fundamentally, and we're scared of this kind of change. And it does feel awful at first. I think it actually feels awful until long afterwards, and you're like, oh wow, that really worked. Thank God I did that.
Yes.
I love your story about the psychic cracking you open, because we need other humans to help us on this journey, right? And I don't care if it's a psychic, a therapist, your best friend, a podcast, a self-help tape. It doesn't matter. Whoever it is who you feel like is telling you the truth and is helping you crack open, go for that. Dive into it, and let them help you. I have so many of those angel advisors, and they come in the most unexpected forms and ways. And I say, go for it. And just try so hard to trust. But it's like, I often think about it. It's like walking across the Grand Canyon on like a wire, and you're like, I got to keep my balance, and I don't know what's coming next. And you just got to like keep on going.
Yeah.
And trust that it's going to, if it feels good and right, it is going to be okay.
Yeah. Just a little bumpy on the way.
It's so bumpy, and you cry a lot, and you're scared, and you're frustrated, and it's, half of the days you think you're an idiot for making these changes. One of my favorite sayings is leap and the net will appear. But it's so hard to do that, to like leap into the abyss and just trust that a net is going to appear. But it always does. Yeah.
Yes. Well, that is a perfect note to end on.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. This is such a pleasure. I love being a woman, and I love talking to other women about what the experience of being female today. We're very strong and passionate and complicated, and it's a great journey, and that's what life is about.
Yes. And a big thanks to Dick Simon, who I interviewed for my podcast about psychedelics, because he introduced us. So,
and Dick Simon is one of those angels who I met. It's really funny. I was going on a retreat that was quasi work related. And on the way to the retreat, I asked the universe to introduce me to a great man. And I forgot to add that I wanted him to not be married. So I met Dick Simon, like the first moment I was there, and he's changed my life. And he's really happily married, and not to me, to a wonderful woman who's also changed my life. So, you just never know. And I grabbed on.
Specific when you're making your request to the universe.
Exactly. You have to be very bossy with the universe.
Yes, you do. Yes. Well, thank you so much,
Leslie. Thank you so much. This is a great pleasure, and good luck with everything. And let's keep in touch. And I look forward to hearing how this all turns out.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for joining another episode of Tall Hungry Girl Talks. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and my website, tallhungrygirl.com. And again, you can follow Leslie on Facebook or her LinkedIn account via Leslie Morgan Steiner, or via @Leslie Books on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks again, everyone.